to their futures. Soldiers speak out.
Good morning. It's great to see everyone here, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity. This is my very first time speaking in public, so I ask that you please bear with me, and I know this is going to sound red, but it's the only way to keep a train of thought. There are specific dates in my life that define who I became and what role I would take in life. For me, two of those dates is October 3rd, 1986, with the birth of my daughter Jessica, and the second one being June 14th, 1988, with the birth of my son Jacob. On those dates, I became a mother to two wonderful, vibrant individuals. When they were born, my hopes and dreams for them were born. This is the role that I have played for 25 years now, and it is and will always be the greatest thing I will ever do with my life. There are many dates along the way that have made my course in life what it has been, but the most life-altering so far has been April 5th, 2011. This is the day that I awoke to find my 22-year-old son, Jacob, hanging from a tree. I will never be the same. My family will never be the same. The one thing that remains the same is I am his mother, and it's up to me to tell his story. You see, the story isn't just Jake's. There are many Jacobs out there. Jacob not only left behind a grieving family and community, but he also left behind his pregnant girlfriend, Ashley. He loved her so much and was so excited, yet scared about becoming a father. They had some geographical issues to work out since he was living in Missouri after his discharge, and she was still back in New York. But he wanted to make sure she was taken care of. One of the first things he did was send her $1,200 so she could take care of some bills. And when he learned that her TV in her bedroom had gone out, he sent her one because he wanted her to be able to lie in bed and be comfortable. He wanted to take care of them, but was trying to figure it all out. Just to give you a short idea of his background, I raised him and his sister alone for 14 years until I married my wonderful husband, Chris. With no child support for 12 of those years, I worked 2 and 3 jobs at a time to try and keep a roof over our heads, so there was no such thing as saving for college. Jacob dropped out of high school and started working various warehouse jobs. He soon realized what a mistake he had made and went to see a recruiter. He got his GED for the purpose of joining the military and studied hard to pass the ASVAB, as well as train so he could pass a physical test to go in as an E2. He wanted a career and money for college, and despite my pleading, he joined the infantry. After basic at Fort Benning, he was stationed at Fort Drum with the 10th Mountain Division. On January 8, 2009, he deployed to the Wardak province in Afghanistan, re-enlisting before he left. For a 20-year-old kid, he was understandably nervous about going, but gung-ho thinking he was going to make a difference in the world. When I got the opportunity to talk to him, he seemed to be doing okay, considering where he was at, with no water, toilets, electricity. In May of 2009, he came home for R&R. Seemed tired, but he was himself. We threw him his 21st birthday party early in a local park. Then he had to go back to war. It all went downhill from there. He had to catch a ride with another company to get back to his cop. They hit an IED. He saw a man severed in half. Once he reached his cop, he learned that his buddies, Sergeant Carly M. Lee III and Staff Sergeant Isai I. De La Pena Hernandez, or Del and Lee as he referred to them, had been killed. Lee was a mentor to him. He witnessed a young soldier he had taken under his wing named Private Peter Cross flip his Humvee down a mountainside. Jake running and tumbling down the mountainside to get to him, only to find his body embedded in the ground and head squashed like a melon. He called me that night. Imagine trying to console him a world away. He gave first aid to children who stepped on IEDs in a creek bed, even though it was obvious it was a lost cause. He witnessed a young boy about 7 jump into some razor wire for some spilled candy. His family, not knowing better, tried to pull him out. He bled to death. The Humvees Jake was traveling in and sometimes driving were blown up by IEDs on more than one occasion. Only one time was he medevaced out. The rest of the times he was told to suck it up, soldier. Please pardon me for being so graphic, but I do so to make a point. This is so hard to hear. Now try living it. These are the things he would talk to me about when he couldn't sleep. He would come in my room and always wiggle my big toe and wake me up and say, "Mom, can you please come sit with me?" He would talk about how he felt about being the only one in his platoon not to receive his combat infantry badge, despite clearly earning it after being in at least 20 firefights. Imagine going through all this and the Red Cross flies you home because your mother is near death. Yet another date that changed the course of my life. August 1st, 2009, my first day out of ICU. I was alive and my son walks through the hospital room door, never letting on about all he's been through, staying by my side. The few times he would leave the room or the hospital, he would be right back and sleep on the bench in the room. It's funny looking back at that, but I think he did that not only to comfort me, but also himself. At the end of his deployment, he got into trouble for consuming alcohol on Bagram Airfield on Christmas. For this, he lost pay and rank. He went from an E4 to an E1, lost his post-deployment leave. Despite the last time he saw me, I was still very ill. This was the first of many red flags to come. Since he wasn't able to come home and get his vehicle, we had it shipped to him. Within 24 hours of getting the truck, he got his first DUI. He called me in February from a civilian hospital and told me he was there for alcohol. I found out after his death, through hospital records, he was actually there for attempting to hang himself. His chain of command was aware and present for meetings with him and his therapist, yet his family was never notified. How does this happen? If he were a married soldier, wouldn't the family be contacted? The drinking continued. He got his second DUI. His chain of command told him they were sick to death of dealing with him. They gave him a general discharge. I believe never taking into consideration his medical records, which stated he was to have a traumatic brain injury follow-up. This was dated August 10th, 2010. He was discharged a month to the day later on September 10th, never getting that follow-up. He got home on the 12th, and on the 15th, I had him to the VA in Kansas City, where he was screened for PTSD and TBI. Both screenings were positive. Finally, I thought he was going to get the help he needed. Little did I know the hoot jumping had just started. With only monthly psychiatric appointments, really only once a month, and no input in those appointments from those living with him. The hoops we jumped through to get his compensation claims going because he was not functioning enough to hold down a job. It was mind-boggling to me, and I wasn't the one dealing with the traumatic brain injury or the PTSD. He filed for unemployment. They tried to deny it. We went on the grounds that the Army never attempted to rehabilitate him. The one tangible thing he had left was some money for college. His separation papers stated he would still qualify for 70% with his general discharge. We got him enrolled and accepted in a local community college. The financial aid office sent the paperwork off to the VA. The response we got back was that he didn't qualify due to his discharge status. Now he had nothing left that made him feel as if his service meant anything. Everything he had seen and done had been all for nothing. A month before he took his life, he was attending a barbecue at his sister's house. He was drinking and started having flashbacks. He was calling out coordinates and telling us people was watching us from the mountains. That mountain, there are no mountains around us. We called the police twice at night asking them to take him to get help. I identified him as a recently discharged combat veteran. I pleaded for them to take him to the VA or any other facility because we had private medical insurance on him. They arrested him for disorderly conduct. His court date came up after he died. I went in front of that judge and told him what had happened. He dismissed the charges, gave me his bond money back, and looked me right in the eye and told me to be a voice, ma'am, be a voice. This was yet another missed opportunity for Jake to have gotten help. The Saturday after Jake's death, I was contacted by Bill Murphy Jr. with Stars and Stripes through a condolence guest book I signed for Aaron Smith. Aaron was a young man that had been Jake's roommate. He was killed by a member of the Afghan National Police named Crazy Joe. I had left my condolence for the family. Mr. Murphy was contacting me to try and reach Jake for an interview. I emailed him back telling him of Jake's death and the conditions surrounding it. He flew to Kansas City and spent 3 days with me poring over every scrap of paper of Jake's that I'd saved, accompanied me to the VA, the police station, as well as other various places looking for answers. On June 24, 2011, Jacob's story was published in Stars and Stripes, taking up the whole edition. In Mr. Murphy's investigation, he uncovered that the Department of Defense hadn't reported Jacob's reenlistment, which meant his first term had been served honorably, and he was, in fact, entitled to his college money. I received the award letter a short while later. I engaged Congressman Graves' office to look into this matter, as well as assist me in the burial benefits and his compensation claims. The burial benefits were denied after submitting the same paperwork 4 times. I called the Congressman's office and asked how could this be. It was determined that the VA had made yet another mistake. A few weeks later, I received a check that didn't even cover half the cost of the funeral. They helped me to obtain Jacob's 201 personnel file. We have requested that 4 times as well. Each time I receive it, the only records it contained were from his enlistment and his separation. Nothing from basic training, nothing from Fort Drum prior to deployment, nothing from deployment. It's like he didn't exist in between enlistment and separation. But believe me, all the disciplinary paperwork's in there. I took over as power of attorney on his compensation claims. They have since been awarded at a disability rating of 80%. I will never see a dime of that money, but I continue to claim because of yet another date in the course of my life. On October 31st, 2011, I watched my grandson, Jacob Anthony Andrews, come into this world, giving me new hope, giving me new purpose. When I look into his eyes, I can see my son looking back at me. I have a piece of my son left here on earth to cherish. Through the story that was published, I have been contacted by many people, but one man and his family stand out. Major Andrew McKeever was on that same deployment. He was in charge of mortuary affairs. In fact, he was the man who processed young Aaron Smith's body. Returning from that deployment, he too suffered from PTSD. I am very happy to say he's doing well through treatment, medication, and his loving family. I encourage you to Google him, please. He has written of his experience. In this tough economic time, he donated the royalties from that article to Jake's Memorial Fund. He helped me get Jake's Class A's in proper order. They arranged a gift card shower through family and friends for Ashley and little Jake. You see, as it turns out, after leaving Fort Drum, he was stationed at Fort Leavenworth, 45 minutes from my house. What are the odds of things happening so far away, but in and out coming so close to home? Major DeKeever is a driving force behind getting the combat infantry badge Jake was never awarded, as well as attempting to secure the Purple Heart. It has been determined that Jacob's death is service-connected, as PTSD and TBI were contributing factors. I have to thank Bill Murphy Jr. for letting my voice be heard. and Andrew DeKeever for validating what I had to say. This brings me to today, February 4, 2012, a day I hope to never forget. The first of what I hope are many opportunities to speak out about our family's story. For every hoop that I've told you about jumping through, there has been many more, and will be many more. But I will keep jumping. I am not going to go away like they are hoping. The thing about PTSD for me is it comes back full circle. Our family has it now at varying degrees individually. For me, the vision of Jake hanging there is the first thing I think of in the morning and the last thing I think of at night. I push that vision out of my head 1,000 times a day. When I do sleep, it is filled with dreams of him crying out to me for help. Sometimes he's a little boy in those dreams. Other times he's a grown man. I am forever changed by my experience. I can only imagine what Jake and other soldiers feel, seeing traumatic thing after traumatic thing. The system is broken, starting with chain of command, all the way to the way civilian authorities handled him. With Jake's death, I am learning life lessons every day. One of them being that when you pray to God for strength, He doesn't give you strength. He gives you the opportunity to be strong. Thank you.
1 in 3 women in the military are sexually assaulted, which is also a form of post-traumatic stress. Since the 1st of July, 5 soldiers that we know of have died in a suicide. It's 5 in 2000 since July of this year, and not including, of course, Jared Hageman. And according to a local report in the Seattle Times, one of those suicides included a combat veteran who saw 2 of his comrades die in a Stryker rollover and expressed to his mother that he did not want to go back overseas with his unit. That soldier did not get the help he was asking for as well, which happens a lot at this base. In my own case, when I returned back from Iraq, it took me a couple months to actually get some sort of help. I did not volunteer to go get help. I was actually kind of forced to by my wife at the time, and friends and my wife also expressed to me that I came back and I was not feeling the same, or I wasn't opening up as I used to be. I wasn't friendly. I started drinking more. When I finally did go seek help, I was put on what I call the Army's quick fix program, which was to be put on medication. I was put on antidepressants, Zoloft. And then after that, I was seen once a month by the psychiatrist for about 5, maybe 10 minutes if I was lucky, and that was just to get my prescription refilled. There was never any talk of how I was, what I could be doing to cope with the feelings I was having. I was going through, I was depressed, I was had thoughts of suicide, and never really anything where this is what you can do to get your help, like this is what you could be doing. There was never any interest either from my chain of command on what I could be doing better. There was no interest in pulling me away from any training. I was always going out doing the training, coming back, get my prescription refilled. And so that went on for almost a year, and then I finally decided to just stop taking the medication altogether, which wasn't a good idea as well. But and then I exited the Army, and now I still deal with my issues. I still deal with PTSD and depression at times, but how I cope with it is I am here and I am trying to help soldiers seek the help and get the help that they have been asking for, or that they don't know that they should be getting help. Soldiers still have there's still the stigma that if you do seek help in the military, especially in a male, and especially a male in a combat unit, you are seen as less of a man, or not macho, or you are not a true soldier. So that's how I cope with my issues. So this issue, as far as post-traumatic stress, suicide going on at JBLM, the spikes of the recent troubles with soldiers committing more domestic violence, committing more crimes, it hits close to home for me, because it could have been me. I could have been one of the numbers last year or the year before that committed suicide. So I will now let Ashley Joppa Hageman speak.
Thank you all for coming. As you know, my husband, Staff Sergeant Jared August Hageman, took his life on June 28th of this year. I'll just give you a quick rundown about how his life was, how our life was. When I first met him, he was already with the Rangers. He hadn't gone on his first deployment yet. And he was charming. He was very outgoing, driven. He told me the reason why he joined the military was because of 9/11. He wanted to seek justice for our country. And over the years, that changed. So the night before his first deployment, he told me about some things that he had heard from other Rangers. How if there was a child with the weapon, it was either you or that child. Didn't matter their age, didn't matter who was in the room. It's a weapon. And so, as he told me that, he had tears in his eyes. He just kept saying, you know, I don't want to hurt a child. I don't want to do it. But if I have to, you know, I'm told I have to do it. When he came back from his very first deployment, it was like like his eyes were lifeless. It wasn't him anymore. He wasn't there. It's like he checked out. He didn't want to be around people. He wasn't social. He used to be very social. He used to do pranks and joke around all the time. He wasn't like that anymore. Even going to the grocery store, he didn't want to go. He'd find any reason not to go, and if we did, he would have his weapon with him, his .45 in his holster, loaded. He didn't trust anybody. First few years, he didn't want to talk. He always came home. He either stopped by the bar on his way home or drank a six-pack while he was driving from work to home, and he would have another six-pack or a 24-pack waiting for him when he got home. And that's how we spent the first few years of our marriage. And I know after his second or third deployment, he had mentioned one night when he was in a drunken rampage about some guy who took his spot on a mission that he wanted to go, but for some reason he had to stay behind, so someone took his spot. And he said that guy had died. And that was the first time I ever saw Jared cry. He said that could have been me. That should have been me. I didn't want him to go. I wanted to go. But they made me stay back. And so he had a few more deployments. And then 2009, he came back from that deployment, and he admitted himself into 5 North, which is also known as the psych ward to the soldiers. Earlier that day, he had called me up. He said he had just gotten back from deployment, after they released him, he went to the bar, drank, and picked up a 6-pack, and on his way home drank it. And at the time we were separated, so he was in his own apartment and so was I. And so he called me up and said he had a gun in the apartment and he didn't want to be alone, that I was the only person that he trusted. So he wanted me to come talk to him. And so I came, and then shortly after I showed up, the Rangers came. He told them he quit. They pretty much told him that if he quit, he would face consequences of jail time or being put in a regular Army squad, and he'd be redeployed for about 15 months back over there. So he admitted himself for help. He wanted help. He wanted to get better. So the Rangers put him in the S5 shop. And that's where they put all the troublemakers or the people that they want to hide. They stick you there so you shut up and you're hidden away. That's where he was. So that way he could get the help that he needed, the counseling, and of course, they gave him prescription medicine. He didn't want it. He didn't want the sleeping pills. It made him groggy. He didn't want to sleep. He didn't want the nightmares. The antidepressant pills, Celexa, he didn't want to take them. He said they made him feel different. And after about a month or so, they told him that he was just using that as an excuse to get out of work, that he had to do it on his own time. And so we went through several counselors, some who he didn't like, he didn't trust. There were some that forced him to talk about what he did overseas, and that would set him back. He'd be in a drunken rage for about 2 more weeks and get violent, have to call the police. There was several times he had a gun to his head. I had to call the police because the Rangers were no longer doing anything about it. They knew about all of our problems. I even went to the base commander. He told me that's normal. It's normal for the men to come back to drink, abuse their wives and their children. And I told him that's not Jared. My Jared doesn't do that. And he just said that's how they handle it. And that was that. And so about 5-6 months later, after he had admitted himself for help and he told the Rangers that he quit, they redeployed him again. And at the time, I was pregnant with his first child. He didn't want to go, but when you're in the military, it's not voluntary. You have to do it. All he cared about was making it back in time for the birth of his first son. And thankfully he did. And then after that, they put him back on the line to where he couldn't get counseling anymore. And they promised him 6 months off to spend time with his family. About 3-4 days after we actually came home with Parker from the hospital, they told him he had to go to some warrior training class for about 4-6 weeks where he would be staying in the barracks, and he was mad. His son was only a few days old, and they wanted him to take a class. And with this deployment coming up, he just kept saying he didn't want to go. He didn't want to lose us. Not only does post-traumatic stress affect the soldier, it affects the entire family. My children have seen a lot of violence. They've seen a lot of fights, heard a lot of things they shouldn't have, seen the damage in the house, the police. They have to deal with other kids. Nobody wants to be his friend right now. because I live in a community where it's all military. Nobody wants to be his friend. Because these military families don't want to deal with the reality. Nobody on my street has said anything to me. And I have quite a few other Rangers and Special Forces on my street. Not one has come to my house and said anything. One of them even worked with my husband. He lives right across the street from me. It tears families apart. And now that Jared chose his path to free himself of the pain of every day, me and my children are still left with it. And nobody, until I came here, seemed to care. And I've spoken with a few widows. No, everybody's afraid to speak up. And I'm tired of everybody just being afraid. Because Jared was, and all he wanted was change, and that's why he did what he did. Because he knew nobody would help him. No matter how many times he cried and he begged and the police were called, nobody would do it. So thank you guys so much for coming. It means a lot.
I treat suicidality because I know the subject inside and out. I know it personally and professionally. At 8 years old, I became suicidal. I'm not going to go into any of the history behind that, but the point for you needing to know is that for the next 24 years after my 8th year, I continued to fight for my life every day of my life. I did not understand why I had to do this, but I somehow got the idea that everyone fought for their life like that every day of their life. For 24 years, folks, 24 very long traumatic years. At 32, I was delivered from my active suicidality. But I will tell you this, as I will explain later on, and I will try to talk as fast as I can. I will speed up the cadence because, Dorothy will be there going, you got 5 minutes, all right, so I'll be ready for you. So follow me quickly. I may be talking like a radio operator here. All right, giving you coordinates. But the important thing for you to get is that after I was delivered from my active suicidality, after many suicide attempts that I didn't understand, and it's important for you to know also that during that 24 years, I only told my parents that I was suicidal. My parents told me that I needed to suck it up and drive on. They were in the military, but they used their civilian words for that. And so that's what I did. I never told anyone because I knew from what I'd been told, nobody wanted to hear that stuff. It made people feel uncomfortable. They didn't know what to do. So I never told anyone. Well, became evident to my closest friends that there was something wrong, especially after the 3 psychiatric hospitalizations after 3 major attempts. So I'm going to talk to you about how I treat suicidality, but how I learned about suicidality and how it forms in people's minds. The important thing to understand, and one thing Greg said this morning was, you remember that a lot of military people, we've discovered that they have never been deployed? I will tell you, most of the suicides have never been deployed in the military, especially in the National Guard. So what's interesting about that is then, what else is going on in people's lives? I'm going to tell you some pretty shocking things, and I'm going to spare you a lot of the data simply because I don't have time to give you all the statistics. So what I'm going to tell you is simply this, that there is a lot more suicidal ideation out there than you could possibly ever imagine. And people don't tell you about it because they don't want to burden you. And because maybe they've told someone else and that person has told them to just suck it up and drive on. So I'm going to teach you later on how to help people who are suicidal and not to be afraid of suicidality. So what is suicidality itself? Suicidality, it comprises thoughts of suicide, attempts of suicide, and death by suicide. And a Compassionate Friends Network uses the words death by suicide instead of committing suicide because it sort of destigmatizes it. One of our biggest problems in dealing with suicidality and mental health problems is the stigma within the society against it. All right, so that is what suicidality is. It's a fairly recent term. It's only been since 2006 since we've used that big, long term, but it encompasses everything about suicide. So let's talk about how it develops. I found some commonalities in the decades that I have treated suicidality. By the way, you can find this on my website, which is jsp3.org. You cannot Google it. It will not come up on Google. They won't pay for optimization. Okay, that's neither there nor there. But if you put the URL, www.jsp3.org, it will come up. And you'll find out all this information that I'm giving you today, plus oodles more. But anyway, so let's get back to what causes suicidality. The commonalities I found are this. An individual comes on very early in their life, and they get the idea that suicide is a viable option. It's an acceptable option to dealing with problems. When I was a youngster, one of my girlfriend's fathers killed himself. He killed himself, and besides saying nothing, what they did say was, he's in a better place. Oh, really? According to who? But that was the word. And I've learned that my patients tell me that most of the time when they're early on in their lives and people don't talk about suicide, someone suicides and they don't talk about it at all. What in our society, how do we interpret not talking about something? It's usually you either agree with it or you don't care. So if you don't talk about suicide to your youngsters, your kids, your compatriots, that's the message that our society sends. I don't care, or usually I don't know what to do about it. So the very first thing that happens is that they develop a method of accepting suicide as an acceptable option. Are you with me so far? Okay, so that goes sort of subterranean. That goes subconscious, and they just hold on to that. Then there comes a time in their life when they get boxed into a corner with untenable psychological problems, physical problems, financial problems, sociological problems, whatever problems they have, and they can't figure their way out. Immediately think, well, I know somebody who's in a better place, and this is what they did. They suicided. And suddenly, that feeling of relief from that problem floods their brain with endorphins, that pain-relieving neurosubstance that we have in all of our bodies. That's what you felt a minute ago when you were laughing. All right? Okay, so now you've got these endorphins in your head, and every time you think about being free, the suicide and the freedom and the endorphins get matched in your brain. And a neural pathway begins to develop in your brain, saying, this is a viable option. So, the question, I often talk about neural pathways in the brain because it's easier to say, do you know the Oregon Trail and how they went through all of those ruts? Have you seen the ruts, the trail ruts? That's where the wagon wheels, yeah, see, David's seen, yeah, so you can see where the wagon wheels over years and years and years have made ruts right straight through the bedrock. You can stand in them. It's rock. That's a neural pathway in your brain, and that's how permanent it is. And once you get in that rut, you can't get out of it. And it's driven by endorphins. Now let's talk about what it feels like to feel the power of hope. Okay, every one of you, I bet, has woke up on one morning and said, I don't feel so good. Maybe I should call the doctor. And then you say, oh, no, I'm not going to call the doctor. I got to get to work. I got too much work to do. I'm not going to call the doctor. And then you feel worse. And you say, oh, my goodness, maybe I should call the doctor. And you go back and forth. And then you finally decide to call the doctor. And you call the doctor, and immediately you feel better. And you think, why did I call the doctor? And then all of a sudden you start feeling worse again. That immediate feeling of relief is the endorphins of hope. The hope that the doctor will relieve your pain. It is the same endorphins that you feel from the relief of removing yourself from a problem that seems untenable or unsolvable. So you see, it builds up a hope pathway in your brain. But you don't know that at the time. You have no idea what's going on in your brain. If you did, you wouldn't do it. But guess what? You don't know it, so you kind of go there because it makes you feel better. Originally, I never thought about killing myself. I just thought about being out of the problem, taking myself out of the problem. So it began to be sort of an addictive thought pattern where I continued on, and every time I got backed into a corner, immediately the thought came up, gee, I'd like to be out of here. How can I get out of here? And then all of a sudden, just thinking about being away wasn't enough to bring on enough endorphins. So I began further down the road, kind of addictive thinking, well, now I need to move towards getting the job done. And that brought endorphins. So you see how it progresses over time, not necessarily overnight. And individuals who you hear just quote, quote, up and shoot themselves, guess what? They don't just up and shoot themselves. Generally, statistics show that there's 6 attempts and many practice sessions before that. So whether you hear about it or not is another question, isn't it? You usually hear much later. Okay, so are you with me now on the psychobiology of this and how it's going? Okay, so then basically we have the stigma of our society saying, don't tell, because if you do tell, someone will slap you in the hospital. I have a patient, she came to see me and she said, I'm suicidal, but I don't want you to know I'm suicidal because I know you're going to put me in the hospital. I said, guess what? I'm not going to put you in the hospital, but I will monitor you. And you will be honest with me, and when it's time, and if I think that this is where you need to go to get safe, that's fine. When I was in the hospitals, when I was in the psych wards, I was there for like 6 to 8 weeks. Now you're there for 72 hours. 72 hours. Do you think you get much? No, you don't. You get sort of warehoused for a little while. And when is the most dangerous time for a suicidal person? Anybody know? While you're in the hospital or 1 week after you leave the hospital. So why did I tell my patient I wouldn't put her in the hospital? Because she's safer outside the hospital. Because what I helped her do was form the Jensen Suicide Prevention Peer Protocol. I invited her friends in, and we taught them about the psychobiology of suicide, not to be afraid of it, that it was a coping mechanism. That is all it is, a coping mechanism, that individuals who think about suicide, they don't want to be dead, they want to be free. They want to be free of the problem that is harassing them. That's it. So if you start problem solving, you can solve suicide and suicidality. You can do it. That's what the Jensen Peer Protocol is all about, is forming a group of people who make certain agreements based on honesty, absolute honesty. You've got to have honesty within this group. And everyone's got to have the education, everybody's got to be on board with it. Everybody makes reciprocal agreements. Guess what? Do you think you should burden a suicidal person with your problems? Yes! Absolutely. How many people would think, no, you shouldn't do that? Yeah. How many people think, no, you shouldn't bother the people who are suicidal and ask them to do things for you? Right. Guess what? The most powerful thing about a peer protocol is reciprocity. One of my patients says to me, you're not going to believe this, but my friend called me and asked me to help his son work out a math problem. And he said, it took me out of my suicidal depression for 30 minutes, and I felt so good afterwards. Who would think to call a noticeably suicidal person? This fellow was in a deep suicidal depression. And I told his group, I told his peer protocol group, call him and ask him for favors. Drag him out of the house, call him on his stuff. So, as simple as that, huh? So that's how we learn to understand suicidality. That's how we learn not to be afraid of it. That's how we learn to help people, by being open and understanding and compassionate about it, that it's a coping mechanism. So now let's ask this question. Does it go away? Nope. It gets extinguished a bit, but it doesn't go away forever. This is what happens. And here's a good example of me, all right? Because how can a person who was suicidal for 24 years, not have a pretty severe, deeply rutted neural pathway, right? All right, so last summer I'm driving along. I'm down I-5. I'm feeling very, very upset and very, very put upon and all those other negative emotions. And immediately comes to my head suicide. What? I'm a perfectly happy person. I'm happily married. I've got a beautiful cat. I've got a beautiful house. What is my problem? So I pulled over to the side of the road. I called one of my JSP3 people, and she said, what the heck is going on with you? And I said, well, let's figure it out. She said, okay, walk me back from here. What is going on? She's not a psychotherapist. She's a CPA. She's not into feelings. She's into numbers. But she knows what to do because I taught her what to do. She knows immediately, Randy, whenever you have those feelings, that means you've got problems that you have not identified, and you need to find out what they are, and you need to solve them immediately. So we walked all the way through it. I said, oh, I get it. I know exactly what I have to do. The next day I took care of it, no problem. But you see, I wasn't afraid of the suicidality anymore because I knew what it meant. It meant I have a problem I have not identified that I need to solve ASAP. Is it making sense to you guys? Are you not afraid of suicidality anymore? Are you going to reach out to people who might have those warning signs that isolating, having difficulty with problems, kind of becoming a little withdrawn, maybe making goodbye statements, maybe giving their stuff away, giving all of those signs that you see on all of those websites? Those signs are great, but if you don't reach out to that person and with compassion and tell them what you have just learned, and tell them they can go to my website and they can download all this information. You can download a booklet that tells you how to form a peer support group, what to do, what to say. You know what? You are now empowered. Every single one of you in this room now has all the information you need. Got it? You are terrific. You guys, you got the deer in the headlights look. That's all right. That's okay. I'm used to it, believe me. I'm used to it. So I'm available to each and every one of you. All you have to do is call me up. All you have to do is email me, and I'll respond to you.
Hello, I'm Dennis Mills. I'm a veteran, and I work with counseling veterans.
I'm Mark Fleming, also a veteran, and I also work counseling veterans.
And we would like to tell our viewing audience, particularly those of you who are active duty or near to becoming a veteran on Veterans Benefit Assistance.
Yes, Dennis and I are at Coffee Strong outside the gates of Fort Lewis every Friday, and we're available from 10 to 2 to assist you in understanding the VA system, learning about the benefits you have available, how to access them, how to make claims. If you have a pending claim, we can assist you with that. Or if you're in active duty, just thinking about what you may need or be eligible for, we can provide you with that information.
We encourage you to come Fridays at Coffee Strong. That's just off of exit 122 near Lakewood, literally at the gates of Fort Lewis. To come with your DD 214 in the military records that you have, and we can assist you in getting the benefits that you deserve for the service that you provided.
We're learning more as we go, as we talk with veterans and we talk with active duty. So every time we meet with someone, we learn something new, and along the way we're able to help you apply for those benefits.
You deserve the benefits that you've earned, so come in to Coffee Strong on Fridays 10 to 2.
Soldiers, speak out. We can tell the truth of what we've seen. We are not liars. Soldiers, speak out. We have a duty to all children and to their futures.